Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Worcester Township Board of Supervisors business meeting for December 18th, 2024. Excuse me. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Rick DeLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my right is Steve Quigley, who is our third member. Lou Betts, who is our vice chair, is unable to be here this evening due to a sort of a family and personal emergency. We wish the whole situation well, but he's unable to be here. So Steve and I will navigate. I guess this would be our holiday meeting, Steve. This is our Christmas and Hanukkah and holiday meeting. Over at the side table, we have Wendy McKenna, who is from our township solicitor, and we have John Everts, who's here from our township engineer's office, and on the back table is Dan Domino, who is our township manager. First and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board tonight?
It's just a reminder that this is being recorded for future broadcast.
Thank you, Dan. First item up on our agenda is public comment. We do ask that you limit your public comment to 5 minutes. Does anybody have any public comment for the board this evening?
Hi, good evening. My name is Lori Kish, and I live at 126 Brindle Court, in Stony Creek Farm.
You have to talk in the microphone. It's very hard
Hi.
for people to hear.
Okay. Hi, I'm Laurie Kish. I was here last month. I live at 126 Brindle Court in Stony Creek Farms. Was wondering if there's any update on the Whitehall Road property that was under discussion last month.
Sure. So
That you may share, please.
Sure. So I'm going to defer to and ask Dan Domino to share what he can. As we had talked about last month, it's a process that we're going through with that owner,
Right.
and
I understand.
some elements have happened, some other elements have not, ultimately. But Dan, maybe you can just give a quick what we can share in terms of sort of where that situation is and kind of how we're proceeding from there.
Sure, yeah. So we did receive a plan in for review. It is under review for the physical issues, meaning the amount of impervious coverage that's been laid down and things along those lines. So we are reviewing that for compliance. Secondarily, and I think of more concern to the residents, is the potential use there, what it's being used for. That is a ongoing discussion. We have made some progress in figuring out exactly what's going on there. But I will say that there is a hard deadline on us understanding what's going on there, and there will be a zoning determination made at that point, and it will go through a normal zoning process at that point, meaning if it's a decision that the owner would not agree with from a zoning perspective, there is legal mechanisms for them to appeal that through the zoning hearing board at that point. But that's where we're at right now.
Thank you. Just one quick question. I'd like to make a comment. Has the county or state been involved that you are allowed to convey?
My understanding is the county has conducted a number of inspections, and there's a separate enforcement process going on at the county level, and ultimately it would go to the state level on that side for stormwater management and impervious coverage at that level, not just the township level.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. I just wanted to...
So Lori, can I ask you just to pull the mic a little bit closer to just so I make sure that we get you on the recording, if you don't mind, if you just want to.
So I just wanted to report that I didn't personally see it. I've seen a lot. It looks like somebody took a gigantic container of Tonka toys and just dumped it back there, yellow, white, red, still lots of equipment. The Whitehall Road property has new mounds and mounds of dirt that just showed up. Now that all the leaves are down, we can really compare and contrast the land from previous to current owner. It's funny, like not funny, haha, but ironic that before it was a tree farm, it was a house and all trees. And now that it's been a tree farm, it's an ever-expanding construction site with fences, containers, construction equipment galore, smashing equipment, paved parking lots, and it just doesn't fail to astound us how much this landowner has negatively transformed the land so far without permits nor resulting violations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lori. We appreciate your comments. Does anybody else wish to make public comment to the board this evening? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move forward. First up, we're going to have official action items. We start with our consent agenda. First and foremost, I'll ask if, Steve, if you have any items from the consent agenda that you wish to remove this evening?
No, sir.
I have one. I do not wish to remove anything, but I do have one correction on the meeting minutes. There's a typographical error on page 3, Dan, of that particular document, where we have one of the residents' names is spelled incorrectly, and his designation should be Doctor, not Mr. So if we would correct,
Understood. I have the correct
so
spelling.
I'm happy to approve them with those amended corrections, if that's okay. So I will, as Lou's not here and he typically makes the motion, I'll make the motion for that, for the consent agenda, which I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda, and includes the following items: the November 20th business meeting minutes, the treasurer's report and other monthly reports for November 2024, the bill payments for the November 2024 in the amount of $316,078.35.
And I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next up, we have a public hearing regarding fence and wire facilities for a zoning ordinance amendment. And Dan, where do we stand with that one?
Yeah, unfortunately, we did not get the Montgomery County Planning Commission review letter back as required for us to pass the ordinance, so we are going to have to postpone that until the January meeting for passage.
Okay. Okay. So that's also going to get rid of item A under motions. That's fine. Okay. So then we're moving up. Motion B is actually going to be a discussion and a motion to approve an Eagle Scout orienteering project at Hebner Park. I believe we have an Eagle Scout here. Dan, maybe I'll have you guide us through this a little bit, and maybe he can come up and give us a little bit more information as to what's transpiring here.
Absolutely. We have a local Eagle Scout that is proposing to do a orienteering course through Hebner Park. It's a limited impact, QR codes on small posts that I don't believe is any sort of issue with the park. It did go through Planning Commission and received a unanimous recommendation by the Planning Commission, and now is in front of the board for approval or discussion.
Excellent. So I did have a chance to read the recap from the Planning Commission. I didn't know what an orienteering course was, to be honest with you. I had to look that up. Sir, why don't you do me a favor and come up to have a seat? I'd love you to take maybe just a minute, tell us who you are, and maybe talk through what an orienteering course is, sort of why you chose to do it at Hebner Park, like what were your thoughts were there, and certainly I know we've had Eagle Scouts here before, we certainly love to support the programs where we can. So I'm going to ask you just to tell us who you are. If you pull the mic next to you, we want to make sure we get you on the video.
So, I'm Kenny Earnshaw. I'm a Life Scout currently at Troop 182. I'm working towards my Eagle Scout project, or my Eagle Scout, and one of the requirements on it is a project. And I would like to do my project at Hebner, because at first, I used to play with FC Monaco, or Methacton United it was called, and we trained a lot at Hebner Park, and I really liked the park. And so I wanted to almost repay the park for the time I spent there. And I would like to put an orienteering course in, which is the skill of getting from, navigating from one point to another point. And in my my course specifically, you would use a compass and it would have a directional sheet to help you get from one point to another. And also on the sheet, for people who also don't know what it is or don't know how to, I'd like to have instructions to help them, guide them through it. So and I want to show around the whole park and have people see the whole park. Because me personally, when I played soccer, I only knew where the soccer fields were. I was like, I never knew there was a whole nother side of the park. So I want to show people that there's more than just what they may see.
So if I understand correctly, they basically have to use the compass and the map, and that's how they navigate from spot to spot. And you're saying you'd have QR codes there so somebody can sort of tag when they hit one of the, and we have, was it 20 different points that you'd, or how many? 24 different points across the park?
It's not decided at like 10 to 24. It'll probably be more towards 10, but
Okay.
there'll be a sticker with like a letter that'll give them like the points, like or what point they're at, the number and a letter, and then a QR code to help them time their course like completion.
So there's some element of competition to that ultimately, in doing it in a certain amount of time or
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. And then, if I understood correctly, the funding, you're going to be raising donations to whatever cost might be associated. There's no requirement for the township to put any costs into this other than just sort of allowing him to do it, if I'm understanding correctly. Is that accurate, Dan? That is correct. Okay. Steve, you have any questions for him? I
No,
think they were
great job.
great.
Anytime we have a scout in front of us, it's, a lot of work goes into the program, so thank you for that.
And Dan, we need a motion to approve this. Is that ultimately the action that's required here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm happy to make a motion to authorize the town, let me make this correct here. A motion to approve the Eagle Scout orienteering project as presented at Hebner Park.
And I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have a motion to authorize the township solicitor to prepare a resolution approving the C. Bradford and Sandra B. Smith minor subdivision plan. I think there was a little, and I'll apologize, it sounds like there's a little bit of confusion in terms of our steps. You know, what we're doing tonight is authorizing for the resolution that we would approve next month. And it's just the mechanics of that's my understanding, Dan, correct?
That's correct.
And Wendy? And we're looking at that. It seems like a step that probably should be removed if it can be removed, but that's kind of where we're at, you know, unfortunately. So, I mean, our action is, I see you're here, I don't specifically have questions on it. I know it's been through planning. I know that the Planning Commission, you know, approved it at their, I think it was their November meeting, or October, forgive me if I forget the month, but it was approved there, and it's a, you know, it's a minor subdivision that's creating 2 lots out of one, and you know, there was a series of, you know, items that were addressed at planning, and you know, there wasn't anything that jumped out to me specifically of concern, and certainly I don't have a concern with authorizing the resolution so that we can approve it at next month. I mean, it isn't at this juncture, there's not, our action isn't specifically approving the plan. I mean, I guess is what it amounts to. So, am I understanding all of that correctly? I don't know.
That is an accurate explanation, yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make the motion, and again, we're not approving the plan, we're approving that we'll get all the documents together so we can approve the plan. You know, a little bit of governmental double work there. I apologize for that, but that's the mechanics of it. So I would make a motion to authorize the township solicitor to prepare a resolution approving the C. Bradford and Sandra B. Smith minor subdivision plan.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. And I'll apologize, you have to wait for next month for us to approve it. But that's sort of the mechanics of it. So that Wendy will now draft all the documents and we'll get that square.
Mr. Chairman, where'd the confusion come in at?
So I'm not, I'll give a sort of, the simple answer is that the past township manager had a process where they would, you know, the mechanics of how you would take something through approval. And there's a series of steps you can take. This is a step that, I know, I think Dan said about, you know, about a quarter of the townships do it that way, where they, you know, they cross the T, they dot the I's, they make sure that every step along the way, this is one of the steps, but it's not a step that required necessarily having to come to the meeting to do that. But this was sort of how it's been done the last few times. We had a conversation about saying, is a requirement, and going forward, sort of moving out of an extra step ultimately. I mean, sometimes governmentally, we just have extra steps. And some of that, I think, is just procedurally trying to make sure we don't miss something. But, I mean, you and I have been through a number of these over the years, and some of it's also just the cadence of how a manager might want to do it. And we sort of follow that lead. But there's a whole, there's all the steps and the dates and the times and things that we need to follow through. So I don't know. And sometimes when I look at them, I wasn't granularly reading until this past weekend, getting through all the stuff. And then by that point, we were already at the meeting.
Yeah, and it ultimately is me as a new manager. I kept it the way it appeared to be done in the past, but I certainly am not married to that process. I can tell you that.
No, I mean, we wanted to go through planning. We wanted to go through planning. We want them to have their say at whatever needs to happen. And if they, once it all sort of gets worked out there, then it comes before us. And we may have a few additional questions, but largely, having reviewed the information, the reality is they're not all as simple as, a minor sublot division. I think is more than anything else. And if it's a bigger project, I think we've always tried to take extra steps to make sure that we're being cautious on bigger projects. I think is probably more, but it still falls under needing most of those requirements. Is I think really what probably took place here.
So I guess the question is, Dan said he's not married to the step, I guess, but if something was instituted for the bigger projects and you can't subdivide bigger projects from smaller projects, so all projects have to follow the same procedure.
I mean, it may be as simple as I dig into it and find, what that delineation is for something that we feel like this process is necessary for, a larger development or a more complicated land development versus something like this on the floor in front of us. It probably is a step that's not necessary in that case. And I'm happy to go and look and find where that kind of dividing line is. And we can certainly look at that as an administrative change, yes.
Yeah, I guess I go back, I think about the Mandrake subdivision a few years ago, that they were under the gun for the developer. If it wasn't done then, became a problem. So I think we should look at that, big developments versus small developments versus not a simple lot change. Any lot change can be complicated to alleviate some of the problems in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think the goal is always to be as efficient as we can, and we're just not always as efficient as, in the effort to try to make sure you're crossing T's and dotting I's, you sometimes wind up with extra pieces. And in fairness, we see a lot of things come through us that until it gets in front of us, we're not even sure, oh, it's a motion, what's it for, a lot of times I'm doing a lot of that research, the previous weekend to this meeting is typically where I kind of get into the weeds on some of the items like that. So
I guess not to expedite the situation, just it's a learning process again. So when you'll type something up and it'll be up for approval
in January.
No discussion next month. Just
Right. Right.
It's already gone through the planning and zoning and everything's been taken care of. All the hard work's been done.
Correct. So they've had, yeah, sure, did you want to say?
Thank you for the motion tonight.
I don't
I really don't understand what's happening. I'm having trouble hearing a lot of what's going on, but I have my engineer here tonight. Do you have any questions for him that would help the process move forward?
So the,
Do I have to bring my engineer back next month to do this again?
I would say absolutely not, unless you guys have questions that come up in the interim, which I don't think that will happen.
I mean, the paperwork that I reviewed, there was not, I know that there were a number of questions at planning that got worked through at planning, and ultimately they wanted to clean up they sort of said, here, there's a couple of changes to clean up on the plan. I know that had to procedurally take place, but there was not anything that I read or was concerned. There were waivers that had been worked through with the Planning Commission. John, you want to add a couple of?
Yeah, so there was a condition that was put on this from the Planning Commission that they revise the plans and submit to the township before the Board of Supervisors. They did that. We got the plans on December 6th, and I would have had my review to you on that Thursday. That review's not done, so I'm assuming everything's been addressed. That review will go out shortly, and that's what Wendy will use that review as part of her agreements.
So Brad, the short answer is no, we wouldn't need the engineer provided the updated plans satisfied all the Planning Commission requests and requirements in terms of updates to the plan. So we wouldn't, and at this point, they'll use that. And if there are questions, again, they can get worked out in the interim to not have him need to be here in our meeting in January. So it's been, again, I apologize, it's just that's where we're at in terms of that. So, anything else to add? I mean, not ideal, but that happens.
The wheels of justice go round and round.
Something goes round and round. Okay. So moving forward, next up is going to be a motion to adopt the 2025 budget. So in terms of the 2025 budget, Steve, we had, and for folks, several have been in the audience over the last few months on this. We had a presentation in September. We had a presentation in October. In our November meeting, we had a motion to advertise. The budget has been advertised for the required number of days so that now you and I have the option to approve the 2025 budget as it's been presented. In terms of copies of the budget, everybody has, again, Dan, I'd clarify this for me if it is not accurate, but everybody has a copy of the 2025 budget in the back of the room. It was also posted online. It was advertised successfully. I'll ask Wendy to confirm that we sort of procedurally did all the steps necessary in terms of handling that so that we can choose to make a motion and approve that this evening. Did you have any comments you wanted to make on the budget, Steve?
No, I think we've had some questions, some residents have raised questions. The township manager has tried to answer them. He opened his door to anybody willing to come into his office to discuss any questions or problems regarding the budget. So I think we've done a review of it for the last 2-3 months. I think we worked on the items there that we need to work on. So I think it's ready to be voted on. So.
And then Dan, just confirm that we've done all the necessary.
All the required administrative steps have been completed.
Okay, and can you concur with that, Wendy? Okay. So all that being said, Steve, I'm happy to make a motion to approve the 2025 budget as it has been presented, both electronically online as well as in the document in the back of the room. It's been moved. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Next up, we have other business. I have one item I want to bring up, other business tonight, Steve. And Dan, I got a little task for you, I guess, is going to come out of this. I got a call from a resident earlier today that was on the Zacharias Trail, and he encountered a couple of e-bikes, the electronic bikes, traveling at what appeared, well, first being on a motorized vehicle on the trail was a concern, and the speed they were traveling at was a concern, and it raised a couple of questions. One is he expressed, obviously, a safety concern, but the other is just sort of how e-bikes get designated in terms of the type of, whether it's considered a motorized or not, and sort of what we can do to sort of deal with that.
Well, I can tell you, I was just on a conference call with the county last week on this specific topic for this specific reason, and that the e-bikes are in not just Eastern Park, they're all over Montgomery County, and that is the exact concern, which is how are they regulated? Ultimately, the county is saying it's essentially up to the municipalities to pass rules against them. We certainly could pass a specifically banning e-bikes in the park. The only concern and question then becomes is enforcement, as always. The state police coverage are generally not going to help us enforce that. So it would kind of just be like if I'm in the park on my walk at lunch and I see one, I could say, yeah, look, but ultimately it's always comes down to enforcement with these types of things.
Mr. Chairman, I brought this up maybe a year and a half ago, and I think the same comments came out that they're really hard to enforce. And we don't have an enforcement mechanism within the township. We have no police. And the state police aren't going to be coming out for e-bike
Right.
violations. We share the state trooper with other municipalities. It becomes a problem. As our manager said, it's an issue with other townships, and I think we can work on this maybe in collaboration with other townships, trying to come up with a policy. But e-bikes becoming a little bit cheaper. Younger kids are driving them, not driving them, riding them through the parks.
Right.
And I know it's become a major problem in the Montgomery County Park System. And how do you handle it? That becomes an issue.
Agreed.
It's something we have to look into.
Yeah, we had you remember the issue years ago with the ATVs, and, we wound up putting a policy in place that invariably didn't solve the problem at the time. The kids just sort of aged out of it more than solving it. But ultimately, Dan, your task is, to pull something together, see what other communities are doing. It is a concern. We certainly want to address safety first and foremost. I mean, just geographically, the trail is deliberately, it winds and twists and turns. You have a lot of blind corners. And in this case, somebody walking a dog and coming, all of a sudden coming around a corner, and there was two e-bikes sort of coming right at them. Nobody got hurt, but, it raises the question and the concern, and certainly that resident expressed
I
it.
will bring it up at my next consortium meeting with the other municipalities to see what, if anything, they have on the books or what they're doing to address this.
Okay.
The other item, Mr. Chairman, is regarding, our apartment complex up here on Germantown Pike, as well as the other apartment complexes that the areas have been zoned for that. I think maybe in the wintertime, we need to work on a newsletter to get the right information out, to explain to people. It wasn't our idea. It comes from the federal government, the state government, the county government, and why we did what we did. And we employed the county to come in and help us to locate the properties where it best suit the township to do it. At the time, we're going back to Mr. Ryan, which is probably well over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when this situation came up. Everyone's familiar with the Palmer property, and we were on the negative side by maybe 250 units for apartments in the township. It wasn't something that we, the township, decided on. It was something that, once again, was pushed by the federal government to the state government, to the county government, telling Worcester he needed affordable housing. Well, I guess it's not really affordable housing if it comes in at the price they're coming in at, but it's something that we're short of in the township. It's something we weren't in favor of, but it was sort of pushed our way. So the property that we're going to put it was on the Palmer property at the corner of Valley Forge Road and Skipback Pike, which could have been 300, 400 units on that property. So the township did their diligence, did their research, employed the county planners to come in, and they came up with a number of properties where it'd be best suited based on public transportation, water, and the whole infrastructure there. But I think that's a letter that needs to go out to the residents as they have concerns. And as I said, this thing really started probably close to 2.5 to 3 years ago, but everyone's now finding out about it. They see the signs and they're wondering about it. So I think we can put a lot of it to rest when they see what we were faced with. And it wasn't a decision that we, the township, started, but it was something we had to finish it before the county or a lawyer came in and tried to control the townships where the properties would go. So that's it.
I think that's fine, Dan, so that's something certainly we want to work on, some communication that can get out. The other thing, just sort of tagging on to that, Steve, is that we haven't approved anything. It hasn't, there's a perception that the board has already approved it, and that's not Correct. So certainly getting some information out and,
If I could just
sure,
jump in, I would certainly like to have input in that process because my office was heavily involved in the whole process
Yep.
for what was done as far as the rezoning. And the rezoning it's called a curative amendment.
yep,
And a curative amendment is something that a municipality takes on when their zoning ordinance is subject to challenge. And that was the place that the township found itself. The ordinance was subject to challenge because there was not sufficient apartment units provided for in the township zoning ordinance. So that's why that process was undertaken. And I'm happy to help Dan put something together there. Another thing just to note is that the property was not rezoned. It was in fact previously zoned to provide for multifamily, but it was necessary to revise the ordinance to effectively increase the density there. So that's just a few points that I think are important to understand. The township did not rezone the property there. It did provide for apartments, just at an amount that would have put the township at risk, that apartments could have been put anywhere, including the Palmer property.
Right.
If the township didn't take the action that they did with the curative amendment.
And to follow up on Wendy's point with the curative amendment, it was something that our manager as well as the law firm worked with. They essentially put a stay on the zoning that nobody could come in and say, we want to zone a piece of property over here. Essentially, they called it, everything was in a frozen
Right.
time.
Correct.
So it gave the township and the county 6 months to figure out what they were doing, rather than someone coming and applying, such as the Palmer property. We put all the apartments on that site. So I think it was a job well done with our old township manager as well as the law firm to try to regulate where these apartments would go within the township boundaries, which, once again, we're being forced to do by the government above us. So thank you.
okay. So next up, we have another public comment opportunity. If anybody would wish to make an additional public comment before the board this evening. Bob?
Bob Andrew, Worcester. 3 quick comments. Number one, I do appreciate you starting to take steps to identify what you're spending your money on. And that's a great first step, and I realize that maybe we should rejoice that we've gotten that far. But the next logical step would be to identify what those costs are being applied to, rather than just telling us these are the bills that we're paying, but tell us where those bills would be applied. So give us the accounts so that we can kind of track and ask logical questions. Some of those vendors are maybe self-explanatory, but many of them are not, and they're just lumped together. So separate them by account, or logically it would seem to make sense. They don't need to be alphabetical, but it would seem that you could apply them to a particular account. So somebody could say, oh, these 3 apply to hydrant rentals, these 3 apply to administrative costs, et cetera. But thank you for at least starting the process.
Okay.
Number 2, you just brought up the curative amendment, and I'll just, from my standpoint, say that's in conflict with the information that was at least presented to us as the Planning Commission, that all of that was taking place because there was current litigation taking place. That's how it was presented to us. And that in the process, that curative amendment not only focused on the City View property, but did in fact alter existing zoning on other properties. So be sure that you present the full picture and not just address the city, the corner property right here. So you did make changes, but it was presented to at least the Planning Commission that that was all a matter of litigation. Of course, we didn't get any of the information, so much of what Steve just said is new information to me, so I'm not even sure how to process some of that. Not sure what was really taking place behind the scenes, but we were not presented with any information. We were just told there's a curative amendment. Curative amendment is happening because there's current litigation ongoing, and this is how we're going to resolve it. And we didn't get any answers as far as I'm concerned. And then lastly, I don't know if it's on my standpoint, so I just asked this question to Dan. The information, the package of information that was on the website today, did that get altered at all? Because when I went to look at it today or yesterday, half of it was in portrait mode and half of it was in landscape. And in the process, many of those documents were cut off. So the budget activities, you know, when they were suggested to be in a landscape mode, they were presented in a portrait mode, and so all of the total stuff was cut off. It was incomplete. I'm just curious, did that just get altered?
It did. We added the bills list, which wasn't generated until earlier today. So that was a last minute, the bills list that you were just speaking about, that was added into the packet. So it was information was added to that, yes. I can't speak for the adjustment from landscape to portrait, but I'll certainly take a look at it.
It was inconsistent, so it
May have been-
wasn't. It was
might
in
have been
between,
somebody
it
on
was going back
staff.
and forth. I couldn't see it, and then even some of the bills that you listed, which again I'm happy to finally see, there were sections that were actually cut off. They were incomplete. I don't know if that was the portrait versus landscape.
I think it was. And I will be sure to go back and take a look at that. And anything that's misaligned or misoriented, we will adjust and obviously make available as we always do.
Great. If you guys, when you go to post, if somebody could just kind of edit that, review it, and say, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Because I only saw it today, it didn't make sense for me to call at 3 o'clock to say I can't read any of this.
Yeah, absolutely understood.
Great. Thank you.
Just to address your comment, you come here a lot, but you're not here to all the meetings, and we have to sit here, we sit at all the meetings. And so we assume too much sometimes. And the minutes really, we've had fights over the minutes. What do you include in the minutes? You know, essentially name, rank, and date of meeting, time of the meeting, and certain things go in there. And that's really why we went to the videotapes a number of years ago to try to see the people that are interested, that have the time to sit there and review the meetings where all these things are discussed. And it's really tough for the people to stay, I guess, up to date on everything we're doing, such as the problem on Whitehall Road. You know, It's been a lot of discussion within the meetings regarding how we're handling back and forth, and someone may come to the meeting and say they're not really doing anything, but once again, our hands are tied, the manager's hands are tied. We work with the legal system and the enforcement agencies to try to do the best job we can, but I appreciate the comment, you know, and your comments coming here, asking the question to do, and sometimes it's not easy. I think Dan has a better background, probably in the banking business and the accounting business, and I think he opens our eyes to some things that maybe weren't quite done the right way before with someone who didn't have as strong as a background in the accounting. So each manager, it's a transition to the board here. I've probably sat here with probably close to 10 managers in my years here, and everyone's a little bit different. Somebody has strong points and weak points, but we always appreciate the comments from the people in the township, trying to make it more transparent for everybody to understand. We assume that the people know that, but you know, shame on us sometimes for assuming too much. So I appreciate your comments, trying to get to the bottom of the problem.
Still working on it. Still haven't got many of my answers, but there's some dialogue and some other pursuit, just trying to get to the bottom of it so that stuff is presented logically, and anybody else, such as myself, can look at it and clearly understand where those numbers are coming from and where they're being applied. And
Right.
I'm not there yet, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Bob, appreciate your comments. Winnie?
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Winnie Hayes, Worcester. Couple of comments. First of all, I'm glad, can you hear me? I'm glad that you're going to readdress the process of getting minor subdivisions approved and taking that step out if it's not complicated, if the individual, the couple, whatever, have passed through the Planning Commission, Zoning Hearing Board, all of those things, it seems like that step could be removed because it's costly. You know, at this point, that those individuals will be further into winter.
Sure.
And trying to get started will be more difficult. The second thing I wanted to ask about does concern City View, and it concerns the changes that were made with the village overlay to accommodate the need to have more apartments in this township. One question that was asked that night, and I asked it actually, I asked what percentage of a township, our township, needs to have be developed as apartments. We had some apartments already, but insufficient. That question was never answered that night. I asked it several times, and if I remember, Mr. Babbitt was our consultant. There were other people there, but it was never answered. And I guess the question I ask is,
Well, fair enough.
Specifically.
Continue. I'll add to it when you're done.
okay, good. Well, my recollection was we didn't get a precise answer of how much would be enough.
Yeah, we got the dreaded fair share. It's articulated as fair share, which is
I
the legal
understand.
standard, which isn't a number. That is the dilemma.
Well,
It is.
okay.
But either way, fair enough.
But that could be why the confusion, because
Yep.
in fair share, trying to calculate. So the pushback you had that night, the biggest pushback was the height of the apartment building, 4 stories, and the density. And as we're seeing, there's a lot of pushback around City View because of its location, the density, the height, the traffic, those kind of things. This is a legal question in some ways. Okay, so we pass that ordinance, and hopefully we avoid developers saying, you have to put an apartment building here because of blah, blah, blah. But now that the City View developers have withdrawn the application, they have to do something again and have to reapply. There's no active application at that site. Is that correct?
I'm not aware that they withdrew the application, is that correct?
Okay, then what was said then at the zoning hearing board? My understanding was they had to reapply because they did not give them an extension on their application.
I can clear
They
that up
denied
for you.
it.
Yeah, so what they were saying they needed to reapply for were if they did want to go back and get the variances that the zoning hearing board had declined to extend, they would have to essentially resubmit to the zoning hearing board and have that case heard again for the variances. So as far as land development, they did not withdraw their actual
Okay.
plan.
Then my question is mute. What I was hoping for is that they had withdrawn it, and there
Right.
would be an opportunity for us to tweak that village ordinance to reduce some of the density and to reduce the height back down to 3 stories. That's what I was hoping for. But that's not the case. That could be a negotiating point. I don't know, because regardless of what finally transpires, by right, they can build on that location. And right now, it's very much a high-density property, and it's the tallest property in the township. And I can't see how traffic nightmares aren't going to ensue. So I was looking for a solution. I was hoping we had a solution, but we don't.
I'm sorry. It's one of those things that we all deal with, and you got the height, and once again, it goes back to the height. It goes back to the number of apartments in the facility in the area based on, and he wanted more apartments, and I guess they came back and lowered the apartments, made the apartments bigger, so the numbers were much they were higher than they are now.
I know
And he
the
tried to put a
numbers.
nicer project in there. And, you know, you sit here and I find it interesting that they come in contact with a lot of people in the township. A lot of people that you know, that I know, are waiting for the thing to be built.
Are
I'm like,
waiting for what?
waiting for the thing to be built. You know, they want to, as they sell their nice homes in Worcester, they want to move somewhere. And I was surprised. So we're under obligation from the legal system to work with the developer. And I've been approached by people and said, why don't you put it on this property? They won't develop. Why don't you put it on that property? It won't be developed. Well, the developer we're dealing with is not his first rodeo. If they could prove that we were in collusion with the landowner to zone Murraymead where it wouldn't go, all bets are off. And this
No,
guy,
I'm not saying that, I'm just trying to, I'm being very focused on this particular development.
Yep.
And that's all.
it's a situation that it was a tough decision for the board regarding the whole township as to what to do with it. And that's why we sought the direction of the County Planning Commission and tried to follow their lead with the
Right.
sewer, water, transportation, all the things affected by it, with the traffic flow. And just like every development in Worcester, it seems, the Center Square Golf Course, everyone thought the traffic would be all over the place, but I go in there quite a bit. And the traffic coming out of there is really dispersed during the whole day. There's not much traffic, even when the school bus is in there at 7:30 in the morning. You may see one car come out every once in a while. A lot of people work from home now. Bottom line is, most of the traffic, they make a right and go to Philadelphia. And I would think there's not much in Worcester for those people to leave.
Right.
Making a left, going to the roads of Worcester, I would assume they'll go that way, either get on the turnpike or head down towards Philadelphia. And so,
Let's hope it's not as big a
We-
problem. But
Right.
you were going to tell me something about that process of what's
Right,
fair
so
use.
we
What's the
certainly-
percentage?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversation around what fair share is, and
share,
it's, you know, ultimately, it's not a number. And it's, the best we could pull together was saying, well, what do the neighboring communities have? And that sets the bar for what fair share should be, and then what the judge decides. You know, ultimately, if you say, well, we won't let you do it, and the judge says, well, fair share is X number of units here, and that's, you know, so the figures were sort of pulled together based on a lot of data surrounding, and not perfect. I mean, you know, you were working on a timetable to try to get as much information as you could. But I do remember, I remember the questions, I remember them asking, and he couldn't, you know, what is fair share? And it's unfortunately not as crisp as you'd want it to be, to say X units. Okay, that's the fair share. All right, well, how do we work within that parameter? I mean, it's challenging, and I wish it had better clarity. And even when we had the discussions with, you know, with our solicitor at the
I
time,
wish
you
it
know,
had too, and I wish more residents had turned out for that meeting. They just didn't.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing, as a potential long-term solution, is to relook at regional planning, where a number of townships form a relationship, and fair share is based on collectively what's in
Correct.
other townships, not just a single township. But I'm taking more than 5 minutes.
That's all right.
Just planning the idea for discussion.
well, one last thing we need to follow up on that goes back to TDRs. You know, the TDR ordinance, you know, you want to preserve this property, and you let the developer take the building lots from there and put them somewhere else.
Right,
And that would have been, that was the prime spot for it. And the TDR holder of the TDRs in Worcester was negotiating with her to increase it 3 times for every unit. So it would have been more units on that property, but they couldn't come up with an agreement on the sale price of what a TDR is worth. So that was another reason the numbers were cut back down.
right, yeah, I'm aware of what happened.
So it
Yeah.
just becomes you know, we take the problem from here. We love the open space over here, but we take it, we preserve that, but those units have to go somewhere else, then it becomes a problem, and then other neighborhoods. So we're just transferring the property, the homeowners from one spot in the township to the
Right.
other. So,
Fair enough.
Thank you for your time
Okay,
and
thank
your
you.
Appreciate it.
explanation. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the comments. Does anybody else wish to make public comment before the board tonight? We'll take one over here. Bill?
Bill McGrain, Stump Hall Road, Worcester. It's end of the year, and if Lou was here, I would be addressing him too. I'd like to thank you guys for your efforts. It's been a trying year for you, maybe? Trying is a good word? I don't know. You worked through a lot of stuff, and we sat and watched. So thank you for your time and efforts on that. My friend Bob and I in the back row often debate what's appropriate for the township to do and spend money on. And we have different viewpoints. Mine's usually need-based, and surprisingly, his is more eclectic and opportunity-based. And so I'd like to just say, as an example, tonight, if you drive by Huebner Park in the Township Building, take a left, go up down, skip back, and go down Bustard Road, and go past Fisher Park, which is a Town Menson Park in Worcester, and just take a look. And that's the debate that Bob and I have. What's appropriate, what isn't appropriate, you know, things that are possible. I'd just like you to take a moment, end of the year, to maybe look at next year. Now that you've got your house in order, Mr. Domino's doing a great job. See what's possible. Because I'm leaning towards Bob's viewpoint.
He's worn you out.
Thank you.
Well, first off, I want to thank you, actually, both of you, for coming every month, and Bert as well. Certainly the trifecta in terms of every month. And we get some people that watch the video. They come every month, and they offer input every month, and we appreciate that in terms of that. And we certainly, it is always a challenge to sort of marry the philosophical differences that we have just in this room, let alone across the township, to try to find, a mix that works for everybody. And I think there are times we're successful with that, and sometimes we miss, but we keep telling us, keep sharing, it's that time of the year, and starting the new year, certainly we are in a better place. I feel much better. I can tell you, yes, it was a few more gray hairs this year in terms of what I had to do earlier in the year and Steve had to do to get us sort of reset unexpectedly earlier this year. And now I think we're in a better spot to start addressing some of the things that have been raised and sort of getting a little more proactive on some things. So I'm looking forward to 2025 in that regard. So does anybody else have any public comment for the board tonight? Jim?
Jim Malik, Worcester. Maybe I can help you with your subdivision dilemma, why you have to, at this meeting, vote to authorize the solicitor to do her job. Because if you do that outside this meeting, it's a violation of Sunshine Law, because you've essentially made a decision to approve the project outside of the public meeting. So that's why you need to do this procedure that you're doing. Number two, if you don't do it, then how does she know to go ahead and make the motion to approve the project? One of you have to go tell her. And if that's the case, if one person can go tell her to spend our money, that's a problem. So it's a twofold situation for that. The budget. How have your audits been for your budgets? Any problems?
No, we've had clean audits for a number of years.
Good. From what I remember, because I got the report, you do have a budget report that gives you all the specifics of what's in the budget. Pretty sure, right?
Can you clarify? I'm sorry.
It's like a budget report that gives you all the line items, like,
From DCED, like
yeah. If I got, I used
like
to
what
get-
line items are what and things along
yeah,
those lines.
you turn one line here into just the whole break.
Yeah, the framework for line items
Right.
is given to us from DCED, essentially.
Right, so if Mr. Andor wants
The
it,
general framework, yeah.
he can just request it and get it, you're not hiding it, it's there. I've done it under right to know, so. And, you know, I have some budget experience. I was the one that found the secret open space fund here. Anybody remember the secret open space fund? John Harris wouldn't give it to me, wouldn't tell me about it, and it's Dave Markle putting 50 grand a year into the township. See, that's the kind of stuff I look for in a budget. You know, your process, you know, I don't care about all that stuff. I look for stuff like a secret fund that nobody will tell me where it is, who it came from, and where it's going. So, you know, good job on your budget, because I don't think there's anything in there like a secret open space fund. As far as City View goes, did the curative amendment come about because of litigation? Can somebody tell us that?
Comment that there was threatened litigation.
Right, but there was no actual litigation?
That I don't recall. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. And then my understanding of the City View project is that the positioning of this apartment complex was recommended by the Montgomery County Planning Commission. Is that true?
There was a team of planners that the township hired to study
Right.
the township zoning ordinance, to find out if, in fact, the zoning ordinance was subject to a challenge, if it was vulnerable, and it was through that process and with the county planning commission that it was, that the ordinance, the curative amendment was developed, essentially.
Right. So, but the Montgomery County Planning Commission had input and suggested the current site, right?
The site has been zoned for multifamily prior to the curative amendment. That site was not rezoned. The curative amendment increased the density at that site.
Okay.
Memory is, and I apologize because I'm speaking.
I get it.
off
I get it.
My memory.
Yeah, you're gonna,
Possible, but my memory with respect to the ordinance was that there was one property that was not zoned for multifamily, that was in fact rezoned, but that was not the City View parcel, that was a different parcel, and I
Right.
apologize, I don't have it all committed. to
nope,
memory.
no problem, thanks. You know, I totally forgot about the TDR fiasco. So, you know, I remember way back in the day with TDRs, oh, they're great, but if they had bought those TDRs, you're talking about a 3-to-1 increase in density at the property? See, I mean, I had a problem with TDRs, and this is one of the reasons I had the problem. So thank God that didn't go through, because what would that have been? What, 100 units to 300 units? You know,
No, for each TDR, you would get 3, so it would have added about 30 units approximately.
yeah,
But either way, it would have been more units,
Yeah.
definitely, but
Yeah,
not
so-
300.
you know, that's ridiculous. And, you know, your location, to me, is perfect. On the edge of the township, already zoned, if I'm not mistaken, commercial, right? And as far as the traffic, I hear concerns about traffic is gonna be blah, blah. When you remember when you were doing the Center Square project, and everybody was flipping out about how bad the traffic was gonna be at Center Square, and it's ridiculous, and you can't build it? Traffic's nothing. They improved the intersections, and it's fantastic. It's actually better now than it was before they built it. So obviously, if they go ahead and build that, they're gonna have to improve the intersection with the turn lanes, deceleration lanes, and all the rest of it. And I don't think that traffic is gonna be that big of an issue. Now, one thing I heard when it comes to location, I heard somebody was talking about putting it across from Variety Club. Now, why in the name would you think about putting apartment buildings across from Variety Club on the empty ground? Makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't know whether you heard it.
I had not heard that, but
Yeah, somebody told me, and I'm like, kind of ridiculous that that's the case. But I do appreciate the transparency, guys. I mean, education's always good, because there's a lot of people out there who are, I think, using this apartment situation to kind of scare people. And I don't think that's good. I think if you get the communication out there, transparency, I think it'll be better for everybody.
Fair enough. Appreciate your comments, Jim. Does anybody else wish to make any public comment before the board tonight? Seeing none, then motion to adjourn. So thank you all for coming. And again, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year.